Hello, my loves. I'm Ellie Frost, and I help people rapidly and radically heal and transform during and after narcissistic abuse. And I want to talk today about grief, dealing with grief during and after narcissistic abuse, but also in life, right? Because a big part of our recovery from narcissistic abuse is handling the grief, right? This is a complex emotion. I think one of the most complex emotions we feel, but also it's a complex situation because when you've been with a narcissist, you don't just grieve because maybe the relationship you've lost the relationship if you have. But even if you haven't left the relationship, you grieve the person you thought they were, right? Because a narcissist bases a relationship on illusion, right? And during love bombing stages and hoovering stages, they pretend to be the person that you want. Even after you've left a narcissist, they may pretend to have changed, which they rarely will have done. So, very unlikely. So, you don't so there's so much grief involved in this, right? If you've left the relationship, you will grieve the fantasy, you will grieve the hopes you had, you will grieve the dreams you had, right? A narcissist will waste your time, right? You might grieve the youthful version of you, your younger years, right? You will grieve what you never had as well as what you did. So there's like a double grief going on. There's a grief from the lies you were told, like what you were holding on for, the potential that you believed this relationship had, that the narcissist would keep dangling the carrot and pretending that they will change, or you would hope in your heart that I did it for years. I just had to have, especially with my parents, I wanted to believe that they would wake up one day, and they would say sorry to me one day. And that those tiny little glimpses of the person they pretended to be very occasionally were real. They were the real them, and their true behavior was not them. Obviously, it was the other way round, right? But the grief is big. We grieve what we thought we had, what we didn't have, and what we did have, right? We grieve ourselves, the loss of ourselves. Because in this relationship, guess what, guys? You lost yourself. You lost yourself at such a deep level. You can only survive in a relationship with a narcissist by self-abandoning. Now, I teach people how to survive in them by not self-abandoning, but you need a lot of tools and often support from someone like me to help you drive that ship. Because, it's not just about stonewalling. It's also about coming into your power in an environment where you don't feel safe, right? And learning how to get safety and boundaries in place. But look, grief is massive. Now, grief is a tricky one as well. I'll tell you why. Because grief lies to us. Grief makes us put those rose-tinted glasses on, right? And jump back into the fantasy, because we think, if I feel this much pain and suffering from the loss of someone, right, then I must really love them. That's what the mind says to us, right? I must really love them, so maybe I should be with them. The feelings are so strong. In grief, grief is a very complex emotion. There's a theory about different stages of grief that we go through. And I don't want to give you some textbook thing here, right? I can do if you want me to, but I don't want to do that. I want to connect with you on the emotional level of it, because for me in my life, I know for sure grief over losses of things, people, places, dreams, hopes, desires, relationships, grief, animals. Grief has been the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. The hardest emotion. Yeah? Because what's grief about? It's about loss. Yeah? And obviously, narcissistic relationship, there's a lot of betrayal, there's a lot of other things involved. But grief is hard. Grief is not easy. Grief goes in stages. We can feel anger, we can feel depressed, we can feel hopeless. One of the things I found hardest in my life was to let go of things. I still think that's something that I find very difficult, because I get very attached. I'm highly sensitive. right? So for me to let go of a person, really difficult for me. Well, it's not anymore. I've got to be honest with myself. I've come a long way. It's not anymore, but it used to be very difficult. And very difficult to get out of the self-doubt that comes with that. Grief is confusing, right? Because I tell you something else I found difficult in grief is blame. You know, in times of my life when I've been in a lot of grief, I attached a lot of blame to myself, you know, because that's part of the process, I think, as well, of grieving, is you think, well, what could I have done differently? And um, is this somehow my fault? Have I manifested this? Because I teach manifestation, right? You can't control the universe, and some things are not a direct result of what you've manifested. They're just things that happen. We have to accept that, right? You don't control the universe. You can have a very strong influence on it. But for me, the confusion of grief, you know, I'm feeling these strong feelings, so maybe I did it wrong, you know? And it's not like that. It's just that grief is very, very intense. And I think a lot of us avoid our own grief. One of the things I do with my clients often, especially if they're not yet leaving the relationship, is accelerate the grieving process. And I can do that with them because I know the stages of grief, right? So they can start grieving it even before they've left it. Because before we grieve, we have to truly be honest with ourselves. We have to have a reality check. We have to really understand what we've dealt with, and that will trigger the grief. Because then suddenly the dream's dead, the illusion's dead. Once you start grieving, I mean, that's the beauty of grief. You are now accepting things for what they are, right? And is there loss involved? Of course. You may have been married to someone for decades, right? You're grieving what you never had, what you did have, the bits that you liked about it. There's always bits you liked about it, right? Abuse is never just abuse, it's highs and lows. Otherwise, the trauma bond wouldn't work. You might be grieving your younger self and the loss of yourself. And I think that's a really important one that I raised before. You grieve the loss of yourself. The sadness of my light going out. You know, I had such a big light, you know, for so much of my life. And, you know, I know it's very hard to put my light out, but there are times, especially through grief, where that light's gone out. My light gone out, right? And I grieved that. It wasn't that it was never coming back. It was just that, grief is a dark place. So what can we do in grief, right? I find grief very confusing because it comes in waves often. And, you know, the more you push against it, I think the less effective that is. You have to kind of allow it. But one of the things I do in Sovereign, which is my program, which I definitely think you should jump into if you like my work, because it will change you. It will change you for the better, right? It help you come into yourself. But there's a couple of modules on heart healing. See, grief is a heart issue. This is our heart hurting, right? The heart never truly breaks. We can feel heartbroken, but it's never truly broken. It's just a bit bruised, right? Or maybe heavily bruised. So it's healing our hearts that matters in this. This is a heart issue, grief. This is about things we cared about being destroyed. Now, unfortunately, again, you know, going through a lot of loss in my life, you know, grief affected my outlook. And this is where it gets tricky, because when you have gone through a lot of loss, it can be very difficult to believe in life again. In fact, we can get quite despondent and give up. And that might be where we feel like people talk all the time. I don't want relationships anymore. They're too much. I don't, you know, if dreams are falling apart, dreams of a happy marriage, dreams of a beautiful relationship, dreams of children even. I mean, narcissists will waste your time at the most important times of your life. But when dreams are shattered, we can really lose faith, right? And so this is another thing that grief affects. It affects our faith in life. And you can't, like, you know, it takes heart healing to kind of like be willing to like explore a little bit again into living dreams again, into having hopes again, into having faith again in life. A big question that comes up during grief is, why did this have to happen, right? And I've sat with that question many times in my life, and it is kind of a very unhealthy place to be, right? Because trying to work out why me? Why did this happen to me? I mean, I know people say you shouldn't be a victim, right? You shouldn't think like that. I really don't like victim shaming, because in narcissistic abuse, there are times in life where you really are a victim. And if you've been through narcissistic abuse, you were a victim to it, right? And trying to get people to not be victim of something they're a victim of, I think is ridiculous, right? So there's this big trend about don't be a victim. I've even heard therapists on the internet talk about that to people, and I think it's damaging, right? Because sometimes it is freedom to understand, no, this wasn't your fault, especially to someone, who's got, like I have, a very high tendency to blame myself for things, right? So, and again, that's often with narcissistic abuse survivors, right? We take a lot of responsibility, too much responsibility often for others. So a thing that grief throws up is this why question. And for me, it was big because I went through a lot of losses, and I believe in manifestation, which I teach on. And, I believe in so many things to do with energy. So it questioned my spiritual beliefs, right? And again, if you go through something very difficult, it can question your spirituality. And my spirituality was a real anchor to me, right? So part of life's journey sometimes is to strengthen those things through testing those things. And I do believe that, but it still can be a very difficult place to be, right? Because I've lost my stuff, I've lost my relationship, I've lost this, I've lost family, I've lost blah, blah, blah. And now I've lost my faith. Why is this happening to me? Right? It's not the healthiest question. People say, you should just move on. You should just let go. And I've never quite connected with that, right? You should just be positive. There's nothing wrong with your negative emotions, guys, right? We're human beings. Doesn't make you a negative person to be going through an experience. But I think lying to ourselves, not being with ourselves, not having our own backs during times when we are in grief, right? Where we are questioning things is a disaster, right? Thinking you should be different actually prolongs the grieving process. Thinking you should just get over something, thinking you shouldn't be a victim when you've been victimized. I don't think any of those things are healthy. I think the healthiest thing is to have your own back and hold your own hand like you would a best friend or an animal or a child that is grieving something. Grief is part of life. There's always going to be loss. There's always going to be loss because people are going to leave the planet that you care about, right? So heart healing and heart opening are the antidote to grief. You have to find a way to be brave enough to open your heart again. Now, I went through many losses over and over again, right? So opening my heart again, you know what I mean? Like, this is just it feels so heavy. It feels like this is a disaster. It feels like I can't go. I've had those thoughts, I can't go through anything like that again. So I'd rather shut down. And I know I have to kick my own ass on that because the joy of life, the beauty in life, the connection in life, the love in life comes when you're brave enough. But you've got to do a bit of heart healing first, right? Heart healing isn't just waiting for time to pass. Yeah. It's being with yourself in those moments, going through those emotions, processing them, understanding that some things happen that are beyond our control. It's, it's not all your fault, right? It's not anyone's fault. It doesn't mean that you're not loved. It doesn't mean there's not possibilities for you, but that possibility is gone. And sometimes the possibilities that we had, the life that we had, there were so many things we loved about it. And that was true for me. There were so many things I loved about it. It felt like such a harsh reality several times in my life, right? So grief, it is I think the hardest emotion to deal with. I found it physically painful. I found it almost making me, it did make me sick at certain times. It's very, very intense. And there are stages of it and it can come back. So can I walk with grief? I teach my clients all the time, we're looking for something to be, like emotionally, we often look for something to be over in order for us to feel better. But what we have to realize is, even if I'm grieving, I can still laugh at a movie. I can still have, if you have children, you can still have a laugh with your kids. There's always more available to you than just the grief. So I think that's one thing to understand as well, right? There's more available to me than just the grief, even if it's just moments, right, where you have a laugh and stuff. So it's not, I can feel grief and joy sometimes. I can feel grief and still, peace sometimes. So I'm not pushing it away, right, because grief does tend to linger, but like it will run its course. And If you don't grieve, you've never truly loved anything. Like we grieve the things we love, right? So there's a beauty to grief, even though it's very heavy, which is that it shows us how deeply we felt, right? Maybe for what we might think of as the wrong people or the wrong things, but it was because of the strength of that, which is a beautiful aspect of us. It was where we put our hearts invested in something. The way to overcome it, like I say, is to steadily heal your heart, right? Which I teach people how to do, and then open it again. And you have to do that very carefully, right? You can do that gently, but it is to open your heart again. If you keep your heart closed, your life is never going to be fulfilling, guys. And what can we learn from grief? I mean, what I should be learning from grief is I can handle hard things. I can still go on. I can still be happy again. It doesn't feel like that at the time. It feels like despair. It feels like, almost I don't want to go again. Like when I've been in a lot of grief, it's felt like I don't want to go again. I don't want to put myself through that again, right? You hear that with people in relationships that have gone wrong all the time. They say, I can't get hurt again. Well, you know what? If you don't gamble getting hurt, yeah, then you don't run the risk of getting loved. You have to gamble again. You have to be vulnerable again. You have to let go of your defense mechanisms. Otherwise, we start sabotaging relationships, sabotaging life, holding ourselves back. You're not going to be happy, right? Unless you are brave enough to be willing to open your heart to life again, to trust it again, right? And that awful question of why did this happen to me, right? Sometimes there's no answer to that. And can you be okay with that? It happened. When we want to understand and give meaning to things, it can be very helpful to us, right? And often we can take the meaning we want from things. Sometimes it has got great meaning in our life, and sometimes it is like, what can I take from it is better than why did this happen to me? What can I learn from it? Who have I become because of it? And there are certain times in my life when I was so grief-stricken that I just thought I'd become ruined because of it. That would be my answer at certain points, and that's okay. That's where I was, right? At that point in time, I felt it ruined me. Okay, that's all right. Can I be loving to myself during that? Can I be okay with that? Well, I can accept it, not necessarily okay with it. So it's a process that we go through. But if you can feel safe in the process, if you can have your own back in the process, if you can stop giving it meaning it doesn't have to have, right? Which is that this is wrong, I should be over it, I shouldn't be a victim. No, something very big happened to me. I am processing it, right? And the more I can be willing to take baby steps to keep my heart open again, be open-hearted again, believe in life again, be open to love again, the quicker the grief is going to go away, right? Let other stuff in, right? Sometimes we feel guilty, right? When we've gone through a loss, especially of a person, we can feel guilty when we laugh, like when something bad's happened, because we think, oh, I should be sad. You shouldn't be anything. You should be true to yourself. And if you can let yourself have a multitude of emotions, even if you're still grieving, right? Still, I can enjoy something, right? Still, I can enjoy my meal, or I can look at the sunshine and I can smile for the day, or there's something that I can feel as well as the grief. So I'm not looking just to get rid of it, fix it, because that keeps you stuck. I'm allowing it to process, and I'm allowing myself to stay open-hearted as much as I can, baby steps every day. And of course, it helps to work on your own thinking, right? And your own mindset, so that you can start looking at positive things. And during immense grief, sometimes that's very, very difficult, right? And you don't want to lie to yourself. So just go as far as you can. You might not be able to feel positive at all, but you might be able to feel neutral, or you might be able to feel relief, or you might be able to just feel, moments of peace. You can accelerate the grieving process by not resisting it, by healing the heart, yeah, and opening your heart again, and allowing the things that come up in grief to be processed, which is things like denial. Why is this happening to me? Dealing with that, dealing with the anger, dealing with the depression, and then coming to an acceptance of things, because the final stage of grief is always acceptance, right? And you can't force it. You have to allow it. You have to be open to it. I'm open. Sometimes you just say, I'm willing to believe that I will be able to accept this happened. right? I'm not there today, but I'm willing to believe that. I teach my clients that all the time because we're trying to force beliefs, right? But actually, it's just the willingness. I'm willing to believe that I'll be able to accept this. I'm willing to come into more acceptance that this happened to me today, right? So I'd love for you to share your stories. And if you're dealing with grief, let me know how you're doing with it and what you're doing that's helping you. Lots of love. I'll speak to you soon.